This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership with one of the contributors to my latest book, the best-selling CISO COMPASS, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, as well as other top CISOs and industry security leaders. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.
Hey everybody, well gosh, I am so excited to be here today. My name is Param Metzakari and I'm officially taking over CISO Stories for the episode. You all know Todd Fitzgerald, the host of CISO Stories and one of the industry's most celebrated CISOs and cybersecurity experts. Todd, how do you feel being on the other side of the hot seat?
I'm just not sure what you're going to ask me today, but I'll do my best.
I promise I'll be good to you. For those of you who may not know, I've had the privilege of working with Todd for a number of years. At the Cyber Risk Alliance, we met when I started working with the Cybersecurity Collaborative, which is a membership community of around 150 CISOs from Fortune 2000 organizations that collaborate and work together to build tools and resources to support the community. Todd is our VP of Cybersecurity Strategy, and one of the first things that we talked about was this idea that he had and this podcast he had started called CISO Stories. And here we are a couple years later celebrating our 100th episode. Todd, how does it feel?
It feels great. It's wonderful to be able to share all this information, and it's become a great podcast. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, well, I hear so many positive things about it. It's been fascinating from my vantage point to watch the metrics continue to grow and the engagement continue to grow from the community. And obviously, as we're going to talk about today, you've had conversations with some of our industry's top cybersecurity and national security experts, and it's just been a wealth of knowledge for both existing cybersecurity executives, but also folks who are aspiring to become cybersecurity leaders and CISOs. I think one of the things I think folks would be probably most interested to hear about is how did you end up in cybersecurity? How did you land your first role, and how did you eventually morph into a CISO?
Well, it's interesting. I spent the first half of my career working as a DBA and as a DBA manager. I led DBAs for a couple decades. And I was applying for this job, and they said, well, do you know anything about security? Because you'll be managing DBAs, the security department, and business intelligence. And that was actually over 20 years ago, and I never looked back. And the funniest part about it is the security team was concerned that I wouldn't spend any time on security because I had a DBA background, and the DBAs were happy. When just the opposite thing happened, I ended up loving security and stayed with it.
And how did that lead to you moving up the ranks, so to speak, and eventually becoming, I guess, landing your first CISO job?
Well, I started out as a manager. I was managing North America and Latin America for this organization. And then I just had subsequent jobs. And it's funny, I always tell people that we have to look at every job that you do. It's only when you look backwards that you see how that contributed to your future success. I was asked for one company to lead the external auditors and the internal auditors and all the security issues for 3 years for a large health insurance company. And then a couple jobs later, I was the global CISO for Grant Thornton. Which does what? Does auditing all these other companies around the world. So that was invaluable experience for me. Yeah,
it's interesting how the paths you take are not necessarily always clear where you end up, but I think a lot of us find that the knowledge we're accumulating along the way definitely helps us be successful in future roles that we're not even sure that we're going to be interested in, much less take. Obviously, Todd, most of us know you not just from CISO Stories, but as the author of the book CISO COMPASS. I just learned that for the 4th year in a row, your publisher has deemed it its top cybersecurity selling book of the year. So congratulations. What inspired you to work on this book, and maybe explain to some of the readers who may not have read it yet what the book's all about?
Sure. I was actually under contract to write this book for a couple of years. This was my fourth book. And I saw a gap in the industry that there were CISO type books out there that were like a collection of stories, but there wasn't anything that was like a roadmap. What is this job? What does the CISO do? And how does the CISO execute successfully in this job? And then I wanted it not just to be Todd Fitzgerald's view of the world, but I wanted to bring in the industry leaders and the top CISOs that I've met through years of networking, bringing them into the book. And so we had 75 other people that contributed to this work. And that's why I think it's played so well, because it's a roadmap. It's like some people have called it like the Bible for CISOs.
Absolutely. I know we've pulled, gleaned knowledge and key takeaways from it for many years, and have used it to drive many of the content initiatives we've had at CRA, and particularly on the CISO side of the business that you and I work on together. You talk about it being a roadmap. From your perspective and vantage point, how has the CISO's role evolved over the last several years? It's still a fairly new role, right? And 10 years ago, we weren't really talking about CISO. So where have we come in 10 years?
It's fascinating to me because I actually dedicated a whole chapter to the CISO evolution. And we've gone through the technical stages, the business stages, the risk-oriented stages. And I think I'm actually going to add a sixth stage to this model that's in the book. And that's the business resilient CISO. And supply chain oriented CISO. And what I mean by that is that the CISO's job really has to be outward looking now and look at all those external relationships that we have with organizations and learn what happens when things go wrong, because they will go wrong with those external relationships. And those are going to be the CISOs that are valuable tomorrow.
Yeah, so much of the work that we do at CRA with regards to executive development and supporting our CISO communities, there's really two clear pillars of content. One is around the technical strategies and the layered security strategies that they need to be responsible for to secure their environments. Then there's a whole new line of requirements they have around being business executives. How do you communicate to the board? How do you define and measure security metrics? How do you manage crises? How do you develop your workforce? And so, it's interesting, particularly as larger organizations develop larger and build out security teams. The CISO's role is a hybrid of both securing the environment, but just being a good leader.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of that, what is your definition of leadership? You've talked to, as we're here to celebrate, well over 100 CISOs just for this initiative alone, and many of those folks were involved in the creation of your book. How do you define, strong leadership in the field of cybersecurity?
Well, that's one of the joys of this job is I get to talk to many people that are leading these organizations for very large companies, very large global companies and small companies. And I think one thing that's consistent is that they really try to understand their people and what they're capable of doing and what their potential is and what that employee wants to do. And they feed that and they invest in that and they listen to their employees, and they don't try to dictate the solutions. They actually guide them, but they get the right talent in, and they get people that want to work for them. A lot of these CISOs, you see them bring their teams from one company to the next company over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as we were just talking about. You didn't talk about technology once, right? Leadership, it really does come down to people and inspiring teams. And creating healthy work environments. And if you do it right, to your point, they're going to follow you wherever you go. On that note, why don't we jump right in, right? We have 100 episodes to choose from. One of the things I'm really excited about to do today is to actually give the listener a chance to hear segments from some of the top episodes that you've recorded over the last few years. So why don't we jump in, just to get started. What are some of the most memorable conversations that you've had over the past 100 episodes of CISO Stories?
Well, I think if we start off, if we talk about those leadership skills, Joyce Bricaglia, who has started something called the Executive Women's Forum over 30 years ago, and has been involved in recruiting CISOs for a long time. I talked with her about, what is it that search firms are looking for and the companies for these top jobs in CISOs. And it was a great interview. She goes through what those soft skills are. So we can listen to Joyce.
That's different than the past is this sense of leadership. Is this empathy for their employees? Is the ability to build and maintain a team and to have true leadership skills, the ability to communicate, to be collaborative, to influence, manage, even when they may not have direct reports. I think that there's more similarities in that sense than to talk about the differences. I mean, the differences are kind of what you would expect depending on the size of the organization, right? So clearly, if you're dealing with a top 100 financial services firm, is very much different than dealing with a nonprofit company hiring their first CISO.
And then I think, after Joyce, we have the leadership skills, but what happens when you're in a crisis and you have that situation? And so we keep it a very vendor-neutral podcast, but I invited Tim Brown, the CISO for SolarWinds, because I thought CISOs want to know what actually happened there. You can read about things in the press that happen. Some are true, some are not true. And you can hear from Tim what happened during the breach, how they responded to the breach, and then what controls they put in place afterwards that we can learn from that can help all of our companies out as we move to the future. So I appreciate the transparency that CISOs give, not some theoretical idea, but the actual reality of what happened that can help us.
Yeah, let's listen to what Tim had to say.
The threat actor for us was very thoughtful, very patient, very directive on what they did. They didn't come in and be noisy. The code that they wrote was, interesting. It was novel, right? Having it wait for 14 days before it started up, makes it, having it blacklist us and not run inside of SolarWinds domain. So I wouldn't say difficult, but I would say that very thoughtful of what they did.
All right, listening to him talk, that brings me back. Tim actually spoke at one of Cyber Risk Alliance's CISO leadership exchanges. I believe it was in San Antonio last year. And as you know, Todd, I work with the public sector through a think tank, and had a chance to work with some of their public affairs folks. And there's two types of organizations in terms of how they respond to an incident like that. And I think SolarWinds done a really phenomenal job in terms of just leaning in and learning to improve their own operations, but also then sharing that knowledge with the rest of the community so we can all benefit from their lessons learned. A really great case study. I'm glad he had that conversation.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO COMPASS, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers.
Shifting gears a little bit, privacy was another area that I know you had some conversations on. It continues to come up. As we look to the legislative landscape, we're going to continue to see policies at the state level, and I believe will eventually bubble up into requirements at the federal level just to standardize this mess of state-by-state privacy laws. What are some of the privacy conversations you had and that come to mind?
Privacy is actually was the phase 6 of the CISO evolution, that the person that understood the privacy controls, the legislation, and where the data is and how it was being protected was going to be the valuable CISO. And so we've been there for quite a while. I invited Ann Cavoukian, which that name should be familiar to a lot of our guests. Ann Cavoukian created Privacy by Design, and she created it at her kitchen table, is where that started when she was the privacy commissioner for Ontario, Canada. Let's listen to what Ann has to say.
I created Privacy by Design at home, and I took it to the office and I sold it to the lawyers, if you will. And I said, look, I'm not trying to replace privacy laws. They're critical. I want to complement them with proactive means of preventing the privacy harms from arising to begin with. And we had great success with this. It grew dramatically. It's been translated into 40 languages. And in 2010, it was unanimously passed as an international standard by privacy commissioners from all around the world. So it just took off after that, and I was delighted.
In addition to Dr. Ann Kavukian, we also had Dr. Valerie Lyons, who also talked about doing privacy right versus doing privacy rights. And the idea here is that organizations can see this as a competitive advantage by using privacy in the right way to build customer trust. And we forget that sometimes because in this field, we tend to look at things as a compliance thing, as something we have to do. And this is where we can have that value add. So let's listen to what Valerie has to say.
A way to measure privacy. It isn't something measurable. We use proxies to measure privacy. Typically, we use proxies like, what's your privacy concern? What's your perceived risk? That's what we use to measure privacy, but we don't actually measure privacy. And so there are many different aspects that build into privacy. They would be your age, your gender, culture, experience, your religion, your whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, so your political leanings. They all affect your sort of perception of privacy risk and your privacy concerns. And so understanding your customer and understanding, do they feel privacy concern? That's part of the trust relationship. So if you can tap into how your customer feels, you can try to fix that using the trust relationship.
And related to privacy, we have to look at all the different frameworks that we've had. We've had people on talking about the NIST privacy framework. We've had people talking about the CIS controls that are leading those controls. We've had people that the CEO, for example, of the Cloud Security Alliance. These are people that really understand frameworks. I also had Jack Jones, who created the FAIR methodology. And he talks about risk, and I love the way that he related to risk to anatomy and physiology and how we tend to look at things. Let's listen to what Jack has to say.
The question, what's more important in the practice of medicine, anatomy or physiology? Well, the answer you should get is neither. You need both if you're going to practice, decent medicine. You need to know the parts of the body, that's the anatomy, and you need to know how they function both individually and as a system, that's the physiology. Well, in cybersecurity to date, we've operated with almost a sole focus on anatomy. Our control frameworks, ISO and NIST and whatnot, these are controls anatomy, almost pure and simple, and have left the physiology, how these things affect risk and how they affect one another in affecting risk, has been left to the mental model of the individual.
Well, thanks, Todd. Those are all fascinating examples of some of the industry's top leaders in these very niche but critical areas. I think we'll continue to see privacy in particular come up again and again, in essence, not just from a business perspective, but also impacting communities, consumers, as well. So, fascinating conversations, and it'll be interesting to hear what your next 100 episodes will dig up when it relates to privacy. As you were talking about privacy and frameworks, I thought of a common friend we have in Jim Routh, and recall the conversation you had with him related to data and data security. I know that in general, actually, CRA just finished its survey with its CISO community, and data security and privacy was one of the top 5 topics mentioned that are priorities for executives going into 2023. What are the conversations you're having around data security with Jim and maybe some other folks?
Well, with Jim, we talked about data science, and it's interesting. In the CISO COMPASS book, I actually gave him 3 pages to write about what he was doing around model orchestration and using data science to minimize workload. We all talk about how difficult it is to find people, but he has gone through and actually done some of this stuff. And so he talked about how he acquired data scientists and stuff. And let's listen to a little bit of what Jim has to say about this.
If we focus on establishing normal behavior and then recognizing deviation from that behavior, that's going to have a higher probability of success than simply applying data science to look for threat actors and threat actor behavioral patterns, because threat actors change their behaviors, they change their tactics, and that's actually what makes them effective as criminals or threat actors.
I think one of the fascinating interviews I had was with Dan Levine, and Dan writes a lot. He writes for a couple different magazines. He was the first CISO of a state government when he was a CISO for the state of Michigan. And he was asked to put Wi-Fi in the conference rooms at a time when that was seen as very dangerous by most companies. And he was basically told he needed to put Wi-Fi in those conference rooms, or there would be some consequences if he didn't. And let's listen to Dan's reaction to this. And I think we've all been there as a CISO where we were that Dr. No, and quickly learned that doesn't work anymore.
She said to me, Dan, if that's your answer, you can't be the CISO in Michigan. And I was just stunned. I mean, I just shocked. And I looked at her like she was a ghost. And I said, well, Terry, let me explain. She said, no, stop. She said, I know you know your stuff. Everyone knows you're from NSA. You got a master's in computer science. You're a smart guy. We're not questioning that. Everyone knows the reasons why you're saying this. I know why you're saying it. I read those articles. I read your emails. But let me tell you something. She said, I've been to Dow, Ford, Chrysler, and GM, and they all have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. They know something you don't know. And I'm giving you 1 week to figure this out. And she said, I'm not saying get it done in a week, but I want you to come back in 1 week with a plan on how we're going to do this, or I want your resignation.
Gosh, you know, it's great to hear those voices. Dan was actually one of the first state CISOs that I actually got the privilege of working with back in the day, and we remain good friends. And I think he just published a book recently as well. So it's great to hear their thoughts and hearing their experiences. You know, what you said about Dan and the position that many CISOs have been in reminds me of just the general topic of board engagement. Right? We talked earlier about the fact that CISOs are increasingly becoming business leaders. What are some of the conversations you've had that stand out to you over the past 100 episodes with regards to just being an executive and how to engage with boards and how to be a successful business leader?
It's so hard to pick these out because we have so many leadership lessons that are like nuanced and little nuggets that, you know, when you listen to a presentation and you learn something, it's like, I can use that. And it's like you almost should have a notebook for all these people because you're getting access to people that people normally wouldn't have access to. Ed Amoroso was the former CISO for AT&T. And a lot of people say, oh, we need to educate the board about cybersecurity and so forth. Well, Ed takes a totally different tact. Let's listen to what Ed has to say.
I'll give you an example. And I think that's counter to what you get 100 people together, 99 are saying, oh, educate the board. But I say no, and I've been a board member. So let me tell you why. How would it sound if you got your board members together and you said, oh, let's do some financial education. Okay, here is the left side of the ledger. And here's the right side of the ledger. And these are called your assets. And these are called utterly and preposterously ridiculous. You join a board because you have judgment and you have experience and you've been in the game. You're supposed to be ready day one to serve. We don't hire people to serve on boards because they have potential to learn something. We hire people on boards because they have experience and judgment from a lifetime of having done what's relevant.
And then we can't talk about CISOs without talking about the first CISO. And we had Steve Katz on early on the CISOs podcast. And Steve did a fantastic interview. And he talks about the board and how the board, they're really smart people. And so whose fault is it when the board doesn't understand the cybersecurity problems that we're trying to put in front of the board? Let's listen to Steve's very direct view on this topic.
He said, so when we go to explain something to a business leader and they don't get it, it's not because we weren't smart enough, because they know they are. They will look at us as being too incompetent to explain it.
And then Jason Clark has had some notable roles. The former CISO for the New York Times, for example. He has led some organizations where he's consulted to CISOs. And Jason, what I liked about this particular clip is we talk about putting that strategy into a visual term that the board will understand. And I really like how he walks through that in about, thinking big, acting quick. And he has kind of a mantra for that. And you can see how he has been successful. And as you listen to his podcast, you also learn he started out at a very early age and had different aspirations that were, I'll just say, flying quite high.
That is a theme that's been, ringing true for me. And I just was told somebody else this just 3 days ago, and they already used it with the board. They told me they were using it with the board today, right? And it was like, wow, they changed the whole presentation because they were, building a board presentation. It was, they, think big, start small, move fast, and that thinking big is the big grand vision. Start small is low hanging fruit, right? Get some wins under your belt. And then it's about speed of execution, right? Because now you've got the ammo. Too often, and again, we talk strategy. I think strategy is easy. Communicating the strategy and executing strategy is where it gets hard, and the tactics. And so when you kind of look at that, think big, that gets people excited, right? That's the wow, yes, like that's the kind of thing we want to deliver to customers. That's the trust we want to have with our customers and with our employees. Great.
Taps
now
into their emotion, right?
Exactly. Now get the start small so you get wins. They're like, okay, I gave you a few million. I love what you produced for that. By the way, that's the other mistake. People they get a bunch of money and then they just go down and they start executing. It's like, well, you need to say, hey, otherwise you're an insurance policy, right? Come back and say, you gave me $5 million.
Well, Todd, you're right. I mean, all of those conversations and the many others that we haven't gotten to yet with regards to the boardroom are just rich with knowledge and are great takeaways. And I believe is one of the ideas behind the CISO Compass, right? It's a really great opportunity for an aspiring leader or a current leader to glean from the insights from some of the industry's top leaders that you've had a chance to talk about. So, look, I know we're coming to the top of the hour with regards to how much time we have together. One thing that you didn't bring up that I have to bring up is an episode that you had with Marcy, where she made a reference about the importance of who you have lunch with. And I think it was just such an interesting idea that I hadn't thought about before. And I was wondering if you remember that conversation, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, she wrote in the book about emotional intelligence, which is so important. And in each one of these gray boxes that are in the CISO Compass book, we've expanded this into a 25-minute discussion on that topic, in addition to all the other industry leaders that we've now have branched out to. And Marcy talks about, there's a lot of people in this industry that are naturally very introverted and may not want to go to that happy hour or may want to sit somewhere and eat lunch alone. And she explains her thoughts of why this is a bad idea.
Technical people by nature just don't talk to each other. They're tremendous introverts. I've gone to some ISSA meetings, and the networking portion, they're sitting down eating their sandwiches or their appetizers and their drinks, waiting for the program to start. And I'm looking at that as like, there's a huge opportunity here to talk to each other that's going missed.
Yeah, that whole episode was just a phenomenal conversation. I encourage anyone who hasn't listened to that one yet to go and check it out. Well, Todd, we can sit here and do this all day, and frankly, we could do it 90 more times because there's 90 episodes we haven't talked about yet. But I think we should bring this conversation to an end today. I think maybe to close things out, what's your vision for the next 100 episodes, and where do you want this to go, and how do you plan on contributing to add value to the community?
I tell you what's interesting is that people have asked me, well, have you repeated episodes? And I haven't yet, because there's no CISO that's exactly alike. And we get these different perspectives. Even if we're talking about a similar topic, you pick up different things. And I learn all the time. And it's the one thing I learned many, many years ago. I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And it's only by listening to other people It's that thing about not being the smartest person in the room. I feel like I'm behind this microphone. I know some things, but there's a lot of people that are smarter than me around a lot of things. You know, recently we had Timothy Youngblood on, for example, talking about 5G and cybersecurity. How many people know things about that, or about quantum computing? There's people that have gone down this path and done the research on these different things, and then being able to lead in these different organizations, working in a global organization and figuring this stuff out. Or when we talk about the priorities for the coming year, listening to people that are working in those spaces and see what those challenges are, people that are looking ahead from the rest of us. And I think that's the fun part, and it's being able to bring this to our listeners so that they can take that and build it into their own programs.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And we are in an industry with so much innovation. Adversaries are rapidly evolving their tactics and techniques, and we are doing the same with regards to how we're defending our organizations and ultimately, you know, protecting our national interests from nation state and cyber criminals. So the work you're doing is important. The work all your guests are doing is important, and I'm really excited to see where the next 100 episodes go. Todd, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your partnership. I know that all of us at CRA are really grateful for the opportunity to work with you. And we have a lot of things planned in store just for the CISO Stories brand alone. We're going to be doing a lot of things to expand the reach of this particular brand and bring it out from just a podcast to a host of digital engagement opportunities for the community. So Todd, thank you for the time. Look forward to the next episode. My name is Param Eftekari, and we'll talk to you guys on the next episode of CISO Stories. Have a great day.
Visit more CISO Stories podcasts on securityweekly.com, where you will find an index to prior episodes. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC or visit cyberleadersunite.com.